Andre, good morning.
Hi.
This past week or so, minimum wage has been in the news just about on every headline. What's going on there?
Doris, yes. The thing with minimum wages is no one has a neutral view. You're either very much in favour of it or you're obviously very much against it. And there are arguments on both sides. I think we need to appreciate that it must be difficult surviving on a very low wage. At the same time, we have to appreciate the reality of the world and global forces. We have up to 6 million unemployed people. It's rather unusual in those circumstances that wages should increase, never mind minimum wages. What are the arguments in favour of minimum wages? Well, first of all, it can be argued that if someone's earning a decent income, they're able to feed themselves better, they're more productive at work, and they are contributing members to society. The arguments against, which are often somewhat simplified, is that it simply makes labour more expensive. And as I was saying a bit earlier, we have to bear in mind the realities of the world. So, for instance, minimum wages here in manufacturing are at least double what they are in China and India, and 80% higher than in Brazil and Russia, which of course are our fellow BRICS club members. The concern is that minimum wages could be a co-creator of further unemployment. The argument being that labour as it is often inappropriately skilled. Productivity growth the last few years has been close to zero, and yet with rising wages that means rising unit costs of labour. It means that machinery is becoming more and more appealing as a production factor. And in the age of automation and the emerging age of robotics and artificial intelligence, it just makes labour even less and less appealing. I think part of the reality is that in this modern day and age, no one actually owes labour a job. And employers could argue as follows. They wish to expand their production of, say, glasses, because the demand is there. To produce more glasses, they realize there's no law that compels them to actually employ more labour to produce that glass. However, if they do elect to employ more labour, which they don't have to, then they are subjected to a whole range of rules and regulations, labour laws, as well as paying minimum wages. So once again, the notion of using labour as a production factor becomes less and less of an imperative for many businesses, big and small. I think it's also fair to say that smaller businesses and emerging nascent businesses are those most vulnerable to the impact of rising minimum wages, which is sad, because all over the world we are saying that small businesses are the biggest creators of jobs. But in this country, one sometimes gets the impression that small businesses are being disproportionately punished by employing labour. Now, a final point to make is that it's perhaps a bit of an elephant in the room, but the whole question of inequality in this country. One can understand the argument that by raising minimum wages, one might help to narrow the gap between those paid modestly and those paid extravagantly. That makes some kind of sense by narrowing that gap. But one is then ignoring the fact that by raising minimum wages, the gap between those earning a mediocre wage and those earning nothing is exceptionally big. So in a certain sense, one could argue that minimum wages also contribute towards rising inequality. And along with that, of course, minimum wages are great for those who have a job, meaningless for those who don't have a job.
And then always our favourite question, so what?
Well, of course, we have to see what impact this will have on employment. We all know the reality of unemployment in this country. It's around about 26%, one of the highest rates in the world, and that's a narrow definition. The broad definition brings you close to 36%. To argue that minimum wages all by themselves create unemployment or further unemployment would be naive and oversimplistic. But along with all the other constraints in our labour market, I fear that minimum wages might co-contribute, co-create at best, a constantly high rate of unemployment and possibly even a higher rate of unemployment. The only way of counteracting that, it's a long-term situation, would be for the productivity of labour to improve in accordance with the increase in wages. And that in turn requires what we all know, and that is a total revamp, a total facelift of our education system and training system, ensuring that job seekers are appropriately skilled to take up jobs in the economy and therefore rewarded accordingly for their input and their output.
Cool. Thank you. As always, great insights.
Thank you, Doris. Thank you.